Now for our conversation tonight on wind turbines and renewable energy. I have Peter Sinclair. He is a renewable energy advocate. And I have David Stevens, who is a wind turbine opponent. They're both from the Midland area, by the way. And to set the stage for the conversation, I think I'd like to show a few facts and figures, a little bit of history on wind turbine industry here in Michigan and mid-Michigan. Bob's showing that. So Michigan's first wind turbine came online in 2001. Currently, there are about 20 wind farms in the state today. There are currently 900 plus wind turbines in the state of Michigan right now. Wind provided 4.2% of Michigan's electricity just 2 years ago in 2016, and that's growing, right? And public utilities, Consumers Energy and DTE, for example, own and operate the wind farms and are working to comply with the state mandate for a 15% renewable energy portfolio requirement by 2021. I think they're on track for that. To sort of further set the stage for the conversation, I think our viewers need to know a little bit about you guys. So Peter, I'll start with you. What's your background? I kind of titled you as a renewable energy advocate. You're that and then some. So tell me about that background.
Well, I'm a fifth-generation Midlander, and some of the older folks in your audience might remember that about 40 years ago there was a controversy about whether or not to site a nuclear plant inside the city limits of Midland. I was a teenager back then, but my parents, especially my mom, was deeply involved in that, and that was kind of the beginning of my education in all things energy, the economics, the technology, the politics.
Right. And
I have followed energy very closely since then, and I've been an advocate for renewable energy, solar and wind primarily, since that time.
Okay, very good. Yeah, you've got quite a legacy to follow there with your folks on the nuclear power plant that they were going to put there. And David, tell us about you. Why did you become so passionate, sort of an opponent of wind turbine energy?
First of all, I'll say I'm not really an opponent of renewable energy. I just think it needs to be appropriately cited to maintain people's rights and protect individuals. My family has been in Midland County also for about 6 generations. My great-great-grandfather was a pioneer in Mount Haley Township. I live on the homestead of my great-grandfather. And so my family's been in the area for forever. I actually moved out to the area a few years ago and retired to the area after working downstate for several years. As I mentioned to you earlier, I own a turbine. I own solar panels, PV panels, and I think it's a great thing. The way I became an opponent is a few months ago, back in June, out of the blue, I got a postcard and it said, "Come to the Planning Commission meeting. It's a public hearing. They're going to put wind turbines, next to your house. You better find out what's going on." I went to that meeting, and at first I was flabbergasted at first and stunned. Number one, by the anger in the meeting. The room was full. Most people were angry about it because no one saw this coming. I mean, you drive by the things and you think, people managed that and everyone's happy and everyone had input. All of a sudden, I go to this meeting and realize this is just going to be dropped on your lap and no one had any input. No one even knew this was happening. Come to find out, Detroit Edison, DTE, had been in the neighborhood for 1.5 years, signing land leases with people, with landowners, but never told anyone else what was going on. And all of a sudden, you go up to the planning meeting, and they have the draft all done and saying this is what it's going to be, and you're going to get a turbine at maybe 1,000 feet from your house. Neighboring townships, it's only 500 feet from your house. That's kind of ridiculous. A 500-foot turbine 500 feet from your house.
Let me stop you there a second, because I think you're making some good points. So it's a sort of more of a property rights issue, and what I'm hearing, and I know there's some other things. And Peter, let me just throw something out. I'll start there. What he's experiencing is a real, I think, a real issue, and yet I think you will say too that maybe there's some maybe some misinformation, right, about maybe it's wind turbines, maybe it's renewable energy in general. Is there some of that out there that this is sort of surprising people, and the information they're getting out there is maybe not right, or what?
Well, let's just, big picture. We're in the middle of a renewable energy revolution that is global. And right now, wind energy is the lowest priced new electricity available in the United States and most places in the world. And in fact, I've got a website, wind101.info, that you can go and actually look at the graph that shows wind energy compared to all the other various sources. But the point is, we're in a revolution that is going to make the internet revolution look like a speed bump. And those states and companies and countries that are leaders in powering themselves on energy that is free will lead the new century. And so we have to figure out how we respond to this new technology. And I think it's a welcome one for those of us that have been concerned about emissions and the way they're affecting our environment from burning fossil fuels. And even now some of our major corporate citizens, like for instance Dow Chemical, is a huge buyer of wind energy because they say it gives them a long-term competitive advantage. General Motors is a big buyer of wind energy. Google, Apple, Amazon, or all the new tech companies have 100% renewable energy goals. Mm-hmm. So we need to ask ourselves, first of all, are we going to be able to compete in the world that is moving ahead, and are we going to be able to keep the corporate citizens that we have and attract new corporate citizens who are insisting on renewable energy as part of their corporate goals?
Yeah, it's one of the statistics that I'm looking at. 71% of the Fortune 100 companies have significant renewable energy goals. So,
right.
So David, as you hear him talking, you talk about these goals, and we're in this global revolution for renewable energy. Do you feel like, as a property owner, or some of these townships are just sort of being run over without knowing what's coming?
I mean, that's how it's affecting me.
Okay.
I can get a turbine 1,000, maybe 1,000 feet, a quarter mile from my house. That's going to affect my life. I should have some say in that, because obviously a 500-foot turbine that makes the noise of a chainsaw, the rest of your life is a nuisance, and yet it's being rammed down our throat. We really have, at this point, almost no recourse at all. Some people in the township have just said, if I get one close to my house, I'm moving. That's kind of my perspective. But going back to a point that the wind energy lobby makes all the time, is that wind energy is inexpensive. That's completely false. That's a manipulated fact. And in fact, the premier of Ontario recently said wind energy is 10 times more expensive than the energy we're turning off in order to use it. He's referring to hydroelectric energy, which is also renewable. But in Ontario, they were turning the hydro off to let the wind turbines run. Because if you turn the wind turbines off, the way the contracts are written, you still have to pay for the energy that would have been produced. It's the wackiest arrangement, proposal I've ever seen in my entire life. You can go to the Michigan Public Service Commission, hit renewable section, you look at a contract. Here's the contract for renewable energy that the state of Michigan has signed. A lot of the wind energy is about 10 cents a kilowatt hour wholesale. Here's a solar site, 65 cents per kilowatt. The going rate for wholesale electricity is about 3 or 4 cents. If you go out to the exchange and if any utility runs short on electricity and they're getting low, they can go buy some more on the spot market, and they pay 3 or 4 cents usually. It's not a valuable proposition.
Right. Peter, you and I
I'd like to respond.
Go
to
ahead.
That.
Feel free.
Sure.
Yep. Sure.
I think I mentioned I've got a website, wind101.info, and I would invite people to go there, and very close to the top you can read an article in Scientific American, in fact, that is titled wind energy is now the cheapest energy and getting cheaper. There's a similar article from Popular Mechanics, which is basically saying the same thing. And you can also look at what experts consider the gold standard of price information for all forms of energy from an international accounting firm called Lazard, and their most recent evaluation from November is there, and it shows wind leading all the other forms of energy in terms of price. Solar coming up really fast. Natural gas is also competitive, but not nearly so much so as people would have thought 5 or 10 years ago. So this is pretty well known, and again, wind101.info, all that information is there.
Just to be clear, there are some places in the country, like in the Great Plains, where wind energy is made relatively inexpensively, 2 cents a kilowatt hour, plus government subsidies. But where I live, in the Saginaw Valley, valley being a low spot,
sure.
the contracts that are let out, the most recent contract was let out over in St. Louis, Michigan. That was for 6 cents, plus subsidy on top of that makes it 8 cents. So if you're paying a wholesale price for 8 cents for energy, you're not able to buy that energy from a low-cost provider such as coal or nuclear or hydro, although Michigan doesn't have much hydro. It's really a fallacy. In fact, another way to prove that point is the countries and states that have the most renewable energy have the highest utility bills. A simple example is Quebec provides their electricity for 10 cents a kilowatt hour retail. Ontario was selling theirs for 20 cents. And the only reason is Quebec has no wind turbines, and Ontario, over the last 10 years, invested heavily. In fact, it was a major political upheaval in Ontario over the last few months, well, actually since last June, because the government would not stop the renewable energies program. So the people rose up with pitchforks, fired the entire government, brought a whole new government in. The new government fired all the people at the utility companies and canceled 750 renewable energy programs or projects. So basically saying we've got to stop the bleeding. I mean, we can't have electricity that costs twice as much as the next door neighbors because all the businesses go next door. And that's the same problem Michigan's going to get into, because right now we pay 17 cents a kilowatt hour, where the southeastern states in the union are only paying 10 cents. Businesses notice that. If you're an energy hungry business like Hemlock Semiconductor, you're not going to build a new plant in Michigan because you can get cheaper electricity in Arkansas.
Right. Well, and I think, Peter, you and I talked earlier about this.
I'm going to have to respond to that.
Go right ahead. Sure.
Again, wind101.info. You can go there and see links to the Des Moines Register, which is a big paper in Iowa. Iowa is the state that has the largest penetration of wind energy and an increasing amount of solar. And the Des Moines Register and the Cedar Rapids Gazette will tell you that wind energy has helped keep electrical rates lower in Iowa than in the rest of the country. As they've built out wind over the last 20 years, their electrical rates have been about a ½ cent lower than the average across the country, while the rest of us have gone up by about ½ cent. So yeah, and as far as major companies, Dow Chemical is now running its Freeport, Texas manufacturing site, which is the largest site of its kind in the Western Hemisphere on wind energy. And if you think about that, they chose wind over gas in Texas. And they did that for a number of reasons. They said because it gives them a long-term competitive advantage. And in large part, that's because we know what the price of wind is this year, next year, 50 years from now. It's zero. And accountants and bean counters really love that because gas, for instance, fluctuates wildly in price and is only going to do more so as it becomes more of a global commodity. And so that's what Dow and GM and Amazon and Google and Facebook and Yahoo are all looking at and making these big wind purchases that they have been.
David, before you respond to that, so I think you're ready, I just wanted to mention to the viewers out there, and I mentioned to you that we did reach out to some of these utility companies, DTE, Consumers Energy, Next Era, Florida Power and Light, to see if they would bring somebody on, make somebody available. They did not. But Consumers Energy did provide this statement, and here it is here. Consumers Energy has made a commitment to our triple bottom line that supports people, the planet, and Michigan's prosperity. We currently own and operate 2 wind parks in Michigan, near Lake Michigan in Ludington and in Tuscola County in the Thumb. Consumers Energy works collaboratively with communities when considering wind projects that generate clean energy, ensuring that we and our customers listen to each other. Wind energy will be part of our approach, along with solar and other renewable energy sources, as we work to stop using coal to generate electricity by the year 2040. And this came from Brian Wheeler, who's a Senior Public Information Director with the Consumers Energy. So I don't know if you want to respond to that or kind of respond to what Peter was talking about.
I mean, Peter says, you know, wind energy is free. It's ridiculous. No wind turbine in the state of Michigan has ever paid for itself at competitive rates. They have to get an enhanced rate from the Public Service Commission to ever break even. You know, Consumers isn't quite as bad. In fact, back in June, they went to the Public Service Commission and said, this isn't working out. Our customers are mad at us because they're putting these turbines next to their house. They're suing us. And the wind resource in Michigan is very mediocre. We're done. We're not going to build any more wind farms. We're going to build them out in the Great Plains, or they're looking out to the west. I'm not sure I take them full face value, because they can still have Florida Power and Light put a wind farm in, and then they'll just buy the electricity from them. So, you know, they can kind of use a middleman or a contractor to disconnect. But the fact of the matter is, even Consumers Power says this isn't a good deal. I'll give you an example. If you want to Google this, actually the first wind turbine, first utility scale wind turbine ever put up in Michigan was in Traverse City, Michigan. It was put up by the Traverse City Power and Light. That was back in actually 1996. At the time, it was the largest wind turbine in the country. If you want to Google it, you see the officials from that utility, that cooperative, they basically say, we put it up in 1996, it cost $700,000, it still hasn't paid for itself yet. And they sold it for $1,000. Basically, they didn't want to tear it down, so they sold it off for $1,000. It's 20 years old. It's never going to pay for itself. The wind turbines next to my house over in Gratiot County, it's the same deal. You can do the math. Multiply the rating of the turbine times the capacity factor, which is how often it's actually turning, which is 29%, times by a competitive rate, whether that's 3 cents or 4 cents, whatever you want to say electricity should cost at a wholesale level. And you see, those turbines would take 20, 25 years to ever pay for themselves, and by then they're wore out.
Peter, do you want to touch on that? I can
Yeah,
go in another
I can
direction.
touch on
Go
that.
ahead. Yeah.
Again, I try to put everything up online where people can look at the actual source. So you don't have to trust me. You can go yourself. And I like to go. I'm a videographer. I interview experts. So, for instance, 3 or 4 months ago, I interviewed a young woman, engineer, load forecaster for Consumers Energy. And she told me that they put together a model to try to look forward to the future to energy resources that will give their customers the lowest cost. And let me just say, Google me, look at my history. I'm not someone that takes everything Consumers Energy says at face value, right? So I come to this with a very skeptical background.
Perspective, point of view.
Sure, but what their model shows, she told me, the model loves renewable energy. And they are able to find wind at a $45 a kilowatt hour, 45 cents a kilowatt hour here in Michigan. And what a lot of people miss about wind on the Great Plains is, of course, the Great Plains are probably the greatest wind resource in the world, and wind energy is very cheap there. There are no people there. There are no markets there. And you have to bring that energy out with transmission, which costs money. Now, when we can build wind turbines and solar farms increasingly here in Michigan, the population is here, the industry is here. And it is a boon not only for our companies and for our consumers, it's a boon for our landowners and our small communities. And I think that's a big issue here, because our small communities have been withering for the last 30 years. I don't think that's news to anybody. But when wind turbines come in, when solar energy comes in, suddenly they become energy producers. So that when they turn the light switch on, the money's not going out of the community, money is coming into the community. And
Right.
this empowers us. This empowers our small communities to build better schools, better roads, better services, law enforcement, rescue services, all the things that make, you know, living in a small town in Michigan the great experience that it is, and that's why I'm here.
And on top of that, you talk about the farming industry. We've got a lot of third and fourth generation farmers
Right.
that are, this is a cash cow for them, right? They
Oh, you
can
bet.
get an annual income of 10 grand to 15 grand by setting it up in their 40
Right,
acres,
and I
then
think
they
that's-
can pass those farms on to their next generation.
There's no doubt, if you're on the inside and you get the good end of the stick, you know, if you're the landowner, you can make money. But more importantly, the utility companies are the ones doing this, and consumers is all for this because they make a lot of money. The proposition is, if they put a turbine in the ground that costs $4 million, and that's the current going rate, is about $4 million a turbine. They run back to the federal government and say, "Where's our 30% tax credit?" And that goes immediately in the bank. That's pure profit. See, a utility company, like say Detroit Edison, their revenue is $10 billion a year. Their profit is $1 billion a year. Their tax liability is probably about $200 million a year. If they can put enough turbines in the ground, they can offset that tax liability. They could eliminate it basically and make their company look more profitable. Most people don't realize this, but since Detroit Edison and Consumers Power didn't own a single wind turbine before the government put these incentives in place back in 2009. Since then, the stock price for Detroit Edison has gone up 600%. This is a public utility, which usually might go up 5 or 10% a year. It's gone up 600%. And it's 100% attributable to the harvesting of tax incentives from the federal government. That's what drives us. That's why the utility companies love this. And it isn't just the cost of turbines. In the state of Michigan, besides spending $3 or $4 billion on turbines, they've been authorized to build 2 new power plants, gas power plants, to back the turbines up. That's another $2 billion. They've been authorized to spend $2 billion more to build a pipeline to bring the gas up from Ohio. And then they talk about all these transmission expenses to get the electricity from the country back to the city where people can use it. That's been another half billion dollars. You add it all up, Michigan ratepayers, the people paying for their electric bills, I mean, the reason they're paying 17 cents a kilowatt hour is because in the last few years since this scheme has been devised, they're the ones footing the bill. I mean,
Let me let Peter respond to that because we've got about a minute and a half left. So
Sure,
Peter,
sure.
go ahead.
This issue comes up a lot. You know, people talk about, well, wind turbines get subsidies. Well, oil gets subsidies, coal gets subsidies, gas gets subsidies, nuclear gets subsidies. In about a year and a half or 2 years, the subsidies for wind are going away. Wind will then be the only new source of electricity that will not be subsidized. And yet, companies like Google and Apple and Dow keep buying long-term contracts that will be in effect for years after that subsidy has gone away. So, you know, I tend to go with experts. You know, I tend to trust people that have spent their lives, say, in fields like accounting and engineering. And these folks at, you know, Google and Apple and Dow and GM are telling us that, you know, this is the lowest price electricity there is, and we know the subsidy is going away. So it's going to succeed or fail on its own merits. And if Dave is right, then maybe the wind industry will go away. But I don't think it's going to.
Well, something else isn't going to go away. This is a good conversation. I'd like to bring you back on again. We could probably do another hour. You guys have done a great job stating your case, and thanks for coming in tonight.
Thanks very much, Michael, for the invitation.
You bet.
I appreciate it.
And that's our show for tonight. We will be taking a break for the next few weeks during the holiday period, but be sure to join us again. Put it on your calendar for the follow-up on Tuesday, January 8th. Thanks for joining us. Have a great holiday season. I'll see you in a few